This morning we have a translation problem. And depending on how you translate this passage, gives you a completely different perspective. The way I read it this morning in the New Revised Standard Version, Zacchaeus is happy to have Jesus in his house. The people begin to grumble, and Zacchaeus says to Jesus, "Look, half of my possessions, Lord, I will give to the poor. And if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I will pay back 4 times as much." Well, here's the problem. In the original Greek text, that verb is in the present tense, which means that in the Revised Standard Version and other versions of the English Bible, the translation goes like this. The people are grumbling. Zacchaeus says to Jesus, "Look, half my possessions, Lord, I give to the poor. And if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I pay back 4 times as much." Will changes everything. One, we have a man who is a sinner, who is a broken, who is a crook, who doesn't do anything right. And everybody knows because he's a tax collector, he's a sinner. Everybody knows he defrauds everyone. He has an encounter with Jesus, and it changes his life forever. And he promises that he will give away all those things. And the other, we have a crowd that grumbles against Zacchaeus because he is a tax collector. He's pegged for who he is. They don't know anything about his character, but because he holds this position, he has to be terrible. He has to be a sinner. And Zacchaeus in bewilderment says, "But Lord, I follow the law. More than the law. I give away half of everything I have. And if I discover that anyone has been defrauded, I give back 4 times what was taken." I don't know how we get around the present tense of that verb. I know it's convenient, and it follows the pattern of other Jesus stories of a person who is sinful and broken encounters Jesus, and they have this flash of transformation, and they say, "I'm going to do these new things," and they become restored. But the story doesn't follow the pattern of those other encounters with Jesus. Jesus doesn't offer absolution. It seems that Jesus recognizes a man who has been wrongly pegged. Jesus recognizes a man who is a son of Abraham, who is doing his best in the midst of the life and the profession that he has to be as holy as he can. And I think that translation of the present tense of the verb is even more reinforced by what Zacchaeus does. He hears that Jesus is coming. He hears that the Holy One of Israel, the Messiah of God, is coming. And he is absolutely giddy. And he does something absolutely stupid. He can't see because he's short. And here is this dignified adult man, and he runs in front of the crowd like a little kid. And he scampers up a tree. And there he is hanging off the branch like a monkey, completely immodest, doesn't give a rip what anybody thinks of him, doesn't matter what anybody thinks he looks like. He is an utter fool hanging from the tree because he wants to see this Jesus. And to his delight, this Jesus looks up at him and says, "Hey, Zacchaeus, come on down. I'm going to your house." And he offers him a blessing because Zacchaeus wanted to see him so badly. This story reminds me of the time when I worked in college at Boy Scout summer camp. In the biology department at college, I was entrusted with the care of birds of prey that had been shot and were injured. You know that birds of prey are illegal for people to hold as pets, but ones that are permanently damaged and can't be released in the wild are licensed in certain settings for educational purposes. And Hiawatha was a barred owl who had her wings shot off and would never return to the wild. And every day, my job was to take Hiawatha out of her cage, to let her have some air, walk her around the campus perhaps, but to put her back in the cage and to give her a live mouse. That was always the diciest part. Hiawatha back in her cage, throw the mouse in, shut the door, and you begin to hear all sorts of noises that you don't want to hear. But when the chair of the biology department learned that I was actually a counselor at Boy Scout camp, she said, "Can't you please take Hiawatha to camp? Is there some enclosure where she could be out in the wild most of the time instead of cooped up in this inside room?" So I talked with the ranger, and the ranger built this beautiful cage that was probably the size of the altar area where Hiawatha could sit on a perch and be out in the sunshine and the weather. And then once a day, it was my task to do a walkabout. And that was my favorite part of the day. I would put on the long gauntlet. I would attach the leash to Hiawatha's leg. She would sit on my arm, and I would go walking around camp. And that's when camp became giddy. 11-year-old boys who were homesick suddenly forgot their homesickness and came running to me. Macho 16 and 17-year-old guys who had a reputation to maintain would come running up, and when they found out that they could pat Hiawatha, suddenly these gruff exterior guys would come up and in the gentlest voice, "Hi there, Hiawatha." And they just melted as they touched this incredibly beautiful creation of God. It was transforming to see how people would run and come to this beautiful creature, how it changed who they were and how they acted. And that's really what Jesus does. If we look for Jesus, he changes who we are. Can we be like Zacchaeus? Are we willing to shed that adult exterior which has a reputation to maintain, and are we willing to run to Jesus with wild abandon? Are we willing to climb a tree and hang off so we can see him? Will we do anything that we can to get near to him? For if we seek Jesus, he will come to our house. He will invite us to eat with him, and he will give us his blessing. There are lots of things we run for in life, but there's nothing worth running for like Jesus. There's nothing to make us giddy like Jesus. There is nothing that will change our world like Jesus. He comes to love. He comes to bless. He comes to empower. He comes to bring out that little child in each of us, that we may have life forever. Will you, will I, like Zacchaeus, will we run to him so that we can be blessed